Welcome back, relatives. This week on the podcast, I speak with Alex DeRoin, a fellow Osage Okie. They caught my attention when I was researching our water crisis back home in Osage County. Alex is a two-spirit artist, poet, storyteller, and awarded water protector. When speaking to Alex, I heard their passion for creating safe spaces and marginalized communities, where being queer and two-spirit can be an even more isolating experience. Part of their resistance work is pioneering the Land Dadaism art movement, a movement that utilizes a unique cross-pollination of indigiqueer ecology and the art of Dadaists' collage principles as metaphor. They co-founded kinshipmodel.org, a nonprofit focused on civic education and voter engagement in the Osage Nation. I personally used the Kinship Model website to help me decide who I voted for in our most recent Osage elections. It was very helpful. Alex, you make my heart happy that there is someone so caring and community-driven that our youth can look up to. Enjoy the episode. Hawaii relative. Dahe.
Hawaii.
Cousins. Welcome Alex DeRoin to the podcast. Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. I'm so honored to be here and be on this podcast. You know, I've actually been watching you for a while. It's just I haven't really been able to fully engage with you yet because I was kind of having a little imposter syndrome, you know. So yes,
Oh my
this
God,
is like a really full circle moment.
Stop. I'm obsessed because when I was back home doing research for the Osage Sovereignty Day podcast that I just hosted,
Right.
I came across the water zine that you co-edited. And I was like, wait. And I don't know how all this information just started coming out about you. And I was like, wait, two-spirit Osage. I'm like, how do I not know this person? And I immediately was like, I need to know this person. And then, everything happened with the podcast and came back home and then it came out and then just work and life in general. So when you
Oh
reached
yeah.
out about the episode with Jody, I was like, that is what I was supposed to do, right? My ADHD kicked in and I was like, wait, back to finding out who you were because I had work to do, but I immediately knew I wanted to know you. And I'm so glad that you agreed to speak to me
Of
on the
course. Of
podcast.
course. Of course.
But I want to give you a proper introduction because you deserve it.
Thank you.
Alex DeRoin is a two-spirit artist, poet, storyteller, and water protector.
Mm.
You are the pioneer of Land Dadaism. First, when I saw that word spelled out with the Osage orthography, I immediately felt a connection. It's even just the way it looks on paper is perfection. So I want to start there. And I
Okay.
want to ask you, I would love if you could define first, let's define Dadaism for people that might not know what Dadaism is and why did you choose Dadaism to be part of your artistic expression? With respect to land and queer identity.
Yeah. So let's get into it then. So, Dadaism, I actually heard about it. So behind me, just for the folks, watching and everything, this is an art piece by Jamie Missenheimer. She used to be a professor of the arts in South Carolina, if I'm remembering correctly, and she's a Choctaw citizen. We met on the set of The Killers of the Flower Moon back whenever I was doing background work at that time. And, the way I was just talking with her, because, as a trans two-spirit person, that also goes by non-binary as well, the way I had to educate myself to survive has made me very articulate in the way that I talk about things and the way that I understand things as well. So while we were talking on set, she was just like, have you ever heard of Dadaism? she was like, you would be a perfect Dadaist. And I was just like, what even is that, girl? So for the people at home, Dadaism was emerging around 1916. It was very much between World War I and II, and it was birthed out of reaction to a lot of the horrors and a tragedy that's going on in those two different wars, and as well as the logic that led up to justifying those tragedies. So what artists were going through at the time is they were either being ostracized by their community from making radical art, or they were just escaping, the horrors of war just in general and fleeing to other countries. They started seeing this type of shift in the art industry, if you will, where there's a type of eugenics of art happening. And that eugenics of art was something that was actually created very uh, forcefully by methods of Nazi Germany. Have you ever heard of like the degenerate art exhibitions back then, Amy? You have? Okay, cool.
Yes. Yes.
So, these degenerate art exhibitions, as they called them, was essentially art that was seized by the Nazi army and from German populations and peoples and citizens, and was put on the walls, and they invited the population to come and mock their art. And the artists were essentially anybody who wasn't a Nazi. So, it was literally Jewish people, it was people of color, brown, BIPOC, queer people, queer art, and the whole nine yards. And, so when that happens, it shows that, art creates a very tangible way of shaping the way people engage with things, believe in different things. So it has a tangible effect like that. So when they started seeing this eugenics of art where they're trying to implement only this art is good or that art is good, that's when they started going ahead and creating something that was counter art. They was making ugly art on purpose at that point. And yeah, so that's where you get
That was
different meanings.
how Dadaist started, right? Kind of this
Yeah, that's how
rejection
Dada
of the
started.
norm.
Was the rejection of that normal. And that's when you get somebody like Duchamp. You're in New York. MoMA is currently hosting a whole exhibit of Duchamp's work, and they created this idea of a ready-made. And essentially what a ready-made is you can take any mundane object from everyday life and you attach higher meaning or deeper context to it to recontextualize it into an art piece, to kind of interrogate what exactly do we consider art? What is art? And all those different things. So the most famous ready-made that people can really think about is The Fountain by Duchamp, which is literally a urinal with his name and his date and the date like wrote on the side. And he didn't make the urinals coming from a factory. And he submitted it to a gallery at the time who was advertising they will show and display all art. So whenever he shows up and submits a urinal, that's whenever the gallery was just like, girl, sorry, like, not profound, not beautiful. Like, we want retinal art, like, not something, avant-garde like that. So then he resubmits it as a criticism against the art industry and that eugenics we were talking about earlier. And we're using this word eugenics just to make sure that we understand what it is. It's something that was developed in American law first, and Nazis adopted it afterwards. But this idea of trying to, use social Darwinism to wipe out either brown, BIPOC people or social Darwinism of the arts in general to promote a certain aesthetic. So, that's the type of where these eugenics come into play, and how eugenics isn't just policing human bodies, but it's policing our art and our expressions in itself. Now, when it comes back to, me pertaining to queerness and all those different things, rejection of the normalcy is something that we're very much grounded in as queer artists, as queer people, because, even the word queer, invokes abnormal things. That's the original use of it. So the reason why I started using orthography to talk about Dadaism is because we have that word in our language, da, as they say it in our language. It's asking you what, really? It's asking you to explain yourself. And to me, one of the things that I really love about that type of thing is Dr. Tink Tinker talks about it a lot, how our language is very action verb oriented. So when I ask you, da, I'm asking you to explain yourself to me. And in our language, church is kikonze, it's teach one another. So I think that the question, the act of telling somebody to explain themselves is an introduction to church, that church idea of, teach me what you're doing, how you're encountering this world so I can empathize with you, which is ultimately an act of love. So to me, Dadaism is very much interrogating this world and what we consider normal. Because a lot of times what we consider normal is very, either consciously or subconsciously erases other people back to the way that eugenics goes into all those things.
Right. Or what we've been fed for a really long time, right? Because
Right.
that practice is still happening. Our ideas of beauty for so long were
Mhm.
Eurocentric, right? Um,
Right.
but I wanted to go back to, I love the idea of words being an action, a verb,
Mm.
like something happening. Um,
Right.
and you kind of started touching on this about I wanted to ask, how do English words and language and Osage words also, I don't know, but by the way, everybody, Alex is also Osage. I don't know if we talked about this, but we're giving you an Osage. This is an Osage centric podcast,
Uh-huh.
but we kind of just started because I'm so excited to talk to you about
Oh yeah.
everything. But yes, Alex is Osage, as well as what other tribal affiliations you have.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Osage, and I'm also Oto, Pawnee, Blackfeet, and Iowa. So there's a lot of internal conflict, between my tribes. We used to not get along with Pawnees back in the day, but my I always usually say I'm Oto first because they always say follow your father, and my dad and that
Right.
DeRoin name of mine is an Oto last name, but the way that history kind of played out, Osage women were very, back in the day, whenever they were shareholders and all that, are very powerful women. So my grandpa's dad moved from Oto over to Hominy, Zonzoli district, because at that time his mom was like, honey, I got the money. I ain't moving nowhere. Like, you gotta
Okay.
come over here. And but that's
Yes, the
also
Mosh.
like goes back into our culture. They always say we were Matra local people, which means that you always went to the village of your mother, but you took your name from your father. So so that
Yes.
is a lot of ways traditional. And so I have been raised in Osage County. I grew up and graduated from Hominy or Zonzoli district. And but I always managed to go across that river for Oto gatherings, encampments when I was younger. My grandpa, when he was still alive, he's been gone from us. He left us for 16 years now, but for a majority of my life, and I'm 28, he was there and he would take us over to that church, those teepee churches. And my dad is, is blessed because he had 21 birthday meetings for 21 years straight for, his entire life. And I was, he had me at the age of 15. So I was there
Oh,
for a
wow.
lot of those birthdays until I was 6. So I got to
Oh,
watch that
wow.
intergenerational love, take place. And it was something that remained very like foundational for me. And coming out and back to like what you're talking about with the way that words kind of shape things and the differences in words and how they shape a lot of the way that we engage with the world. English is very much one of those type of things where it's a noun focused. The reason why it's now in focus is it has this type of, it's a tool to codify and objectify everything. English has a way of making things either this or that, so we can get very detailed and making it something to be digitized for consumption. That's what English was actually
Right.
created, and it was a tool for colonization. So when it
Yep.
comes to our language, Dr. Tink Tinker talks about this a lot extensively in a lot of his different essays. Osage is very action verb oriented, which means that it leaves a lot of fluidity and a lot of context to be meaningful in the way that we describe things. In our language, it's not this or that. There is this, there is that, but there's also something in between as well. You can kind of see that in the way that our colors, as an artist, I think of things in motifs and symbolism and stuff like that. And, our elders always tell us those colors, red, blue, and yellow, are very, are cosmic colors to us. Red is the color of the people. It's the color of blood. It's the color of the earth. It's the color of all those different things. And then that blue is the color of that sky. It's the color of that water. It's the color of all those different things, and blue can be, translated to black as well, to be death as well. Red and can be life. They're, they're opposites, but there's something that connects them. And I've had people tell me this extensively in the past and in the present too. The yellow is where they say people like me come from because it's the change maker. It's that lightning bolt, that mysterious thing that connects the sky to the earth and makes them one.
I
And
love that.
yes, and you can see that type of relationship happening because when you look at primary colors and the way color theory works, green's an offshoot of that, of yellow. Green
Right.
is a mixture of
Right.
those things, and plants do that. I always say plants are like little love poems that connect earth to the sky because they're always reaching up. You know what I mean? Lightning does the same thing. And as two-spirit people, something that I've been, told in my time researching these things and living this life and coming into this truth, they always say that we look to nature to decipher natural order. You can hear that in a lot of our, videos the Osage Nation has posted on their YouTube channels of, our elders saying that, even
Yes.
our political, leaders saying that same thing. So if that's true, then we can observe queerness in nature. You can go out there and observe Michoge people in things like corn. A little known fact for people: corn, has a male and a female organ on the same body. Those little hairs that grow out the side is a female organ, and those little bean-looking things at the top, that's the male organ where the pollen comes from. So that is a ancestor or a transcestor or a queer ancestor
Yes.
that our people would, feed themselves with first and foremost. We'd call it a relative, but we'd learn to embody that type of, gender fluidity from observing it in nature. Yonkapins are another one, they exist completely
Yes.
outside the binary. They self-reproduce. They don't have the concepts of male or female. They just are. And if you ever seen them bloom, they're yellow. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like this color
Yes.
is
I love the
something we can observe about.
interconnectedness. I
Yes,
love the
we
interconnectedness of
we're in order. We love our good
nature. We
interconnectedness,
love our order,
We love our order.
and
We
but
love all those things.
yes, we love the order and the mystery of what we can't see,
Hmm.
and just
Yes.
underneath the soil too, and what's
Hmm.
growing. And uh, I
And
love
I
how
think
you
that goes back.
explain that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
and I think that
of
goes back
course.
to the way that we understand our creator. We call it Wakanto, the great mystery. And and I think that's something why we say teaching one another as church, because if it's a mystery and you can't fully understand it and it exists in everything and all things, then I think the act of teaching one another helps us understand the mystery, which is why we call that church. And the thing is,
Yeah.
for, English is so hell bent on turning everything into an objectified, codified thing. The reason why we leave it loose to interpretation is because it allows people to be able to have their own interpretations of it. That promotes freedom. It promotes freedom of
Yeah.
expression. And to me, I
Right.
think that's an antidote to, what a lot of people are dealing with in this modern day of having to either be this or that. The gender binary is very much built that way too. A man means to not be a woman, and a woman means not to be a man, and those kind of things superimposes itself onto us as if they're natural. But as we just talked about, they're not. And,
Yeah.
that's the thing with our relationship with these words. Language matters because language has context already added to it. And you're always going to lose the original intent when you try to translate our language into English. Like,
Yeah.
kikonze and wahoin and all these different words can be summarized in one word, but we know it means so much more than just
Right.
that
It's a
one word.
feeling too, right?
Right. So yeah, so that language to me mattered, and to kind of play against it and to kind of play with it and cross-pollinate it with, da da and English dada. That cross-pollination to me is something that can be very symbolic to what land back and rematriation calls for, which acknowledges, my liberation and my freedom is tied to your liberation and freedom. Whenever
Yes.
I lose the ability to potentially express myself, so too does straight cis natives. We see that being, actualized with what happened with Coal Brings Plenty. He was a cis straight native man who just had long hair. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
anti-trans legislation in Kansas ultimately creates the type of environment where a straight cis native man can also be targeted by anti-trans legislation. So, that's something I very
exactly.
much, yes. So I try to connect that very much. I always say I'm
Yeah.
non-binary, not just in my gender expression, but I'm non-binary to erode the us versus them.
Right, because words
Mhm.
matter, and
They do.
I love the emphasis on language and how words matter, because for you, as an act of survival, you've had to be choose you've had to choose specific words
Hmm.
to say, right? To communicate who you are and your ways, and it's so beautiful, and you are such a poet. You're also a poet, if I didn't say this.
Oh yeah, you did.
And I love the way you use your words. But I wanted to go back. Now, you say you grew up in Hominy.
Hmm.
You grew up in Hominy, Oklahoma, which, as we all pretty much know, anyone who listens to this podcast knows that Oklahoma isn't known for being, very accepting, or a safe space for queer, non-binary, two-spirit community members. But I wanted to ask you, what was it like growing up Osage and two-spirit for you? What
Hmm.
was that experience like?
I always say that, I came into this world just a simple person, free. I only knew just what I wanted to do. I only knew that I wanted to sing. I used to want to sing in karaoke machines to like Big Girls Don't Cry. And like all of these,
Yes.
like I wanted to sing those kind of feminine songs. And it wasn't something that was like superimposed upon me. I didn't have nobody telling me, you have to like this music. In fact, it was the exact opposite.
You
And
just
where I grew
happen
up,
to have great taste.
I happen to have great taste. But the thing is, the exact opposite of that narrative that we hear nowadays, that queerness superimposes itself onto people, it actually was the opposite for me. I didn't realize I was different until I had, my guardians, the people who say they loved me started policing my expressions out of, what they thought was love. They always tell me, well, you can't do that because you'll be, made fun of. You can't do that because people will call you this. You can't do that because people call you that. And sometimes they would, forcibly use forceful language or, discipline me for just trying to be free, for having good taste. And you know what I mean? And that's the thing is I learned to police myself first and foremost from my family, and they did love me. These type of policings masquerade themselves like with love. They think it's an act of love that's doing it, but in reality, it's not. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
something that, the gender binary superimposed itself upon me first. So through life, I always tell people, I'm the most transphobic person I know because I had to learn how to hunt myself to survive. I had to learn to
Right.
amputate myself to be able to exist in this world, and I didn't know how to stop. That was my problem. And, in our culture, we have this very much like Ilonshka, it's a man's dance, the dance of the firstborn son. And I am an Alompa. I was the firstborn son of my dad. And, I always say like I'm a femme Lompa because,
Yes.
identifying as a man isn't really something that feels genuine to me. It
Right.
alienates. Sometimes when I dance, that's why, people always ask me, how come you don't dance? It's so rare to see me dance because those clothes don't feel like my clothes. And,
Yeah.
it's something that I have to try to reconcile with on my own, because, we come from a culture where you don't see that many queer elders. I'm blessed to have queer elders like Josie Tallchief. I'm blessed to have queer elders like Bill Sands Fletcher. I'm blessed to have those people in my life. And, Bill Sands Fletcher was the last full-blooded Osage from Hominy who happened to be a gay man. Like that was powerful to me because it showed me that
Yes.
we had always been here. That showed me that people like us, people that are queer, have been kissing this earth since time immemorial. even though at the time I wasn't armed with the language to understand and articulate that pain that I was feeling, they had the map, like I've heard other poets, the queer poets say, this hurt is like letting a balloon go. You don't know where the balloon ended up, but you let something go and you're longing for that. You know what I mean? And to me, that was something that was very much like evident in my life for a long time. And it wasn't until, I started becoming a teenager and I actually came out, but it was one of those things like I came out before Obama made that speech. I came out before all of those things happened, and it was very much not a safe environment for me to do that. But I understood that if I hadn't have done that, I don't think I would have survived high school. If I hadn't decided to live, and be okay and live that truth, I don't think I would have survived at all. And, it wasn't until I left and, I wasn't very received by my family at first for those kinds of things. I ran away. And
Yeah.
that pain of losing those things, I ran off to go to Oklahoma City after I graduated. And, I even tried to call myself Mexican back then because I didn't even want anything to do with imagining home at the time. And,
Yeah.
it wasn't until I started encountering queer elders from other places who reminded me, you're something, you come from something amazing. I encountered queer elders in Oklahoma City who, rest in peace, but they didn't make it very long, but they, um, they reinstilled that type of love in me. In this world, they try to create this narrative that to be queer is to live in pain, that to be queer is to
Yeah.
live in all these different things. But whenever I came into this world, being queer was just love. It was having good taste. It was actually very joyous. When I looked at what Josie and Bill Sams was doing back at home, they lived very joyous lives. So being queer wasn't something that
Yes.
was in pain. And I felt like that was like a
No.
scam I was describing to. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until that I
And I
reclaimed
and
that
I
I was
think
able to
too
come home.
sometimes, right. Well, I want to get back to when you came home, but I know that I've heard this before from you know older people, boomer, pre-boomer generations of I didn't want you to be gay because I thought this was going to be a horrible world for you. People don't are not going to like you. You're going to have so much
Mhm.
trouble, right? So
Right.
their fear for you of like we want just you to have an easy go at it, right? The world is hard
Mhm.
enough. You're this, you're that, and then on top of it, you're a trans person, right? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that is their own voyage, right? Where coming to
Right.
terms, although that's not, doesn't have to deal with us, but that's how they kind of, thought of protecting us or that loving us
Mhm.
was like, no, like we don't want that road for you because it could be
Yeah.
hard, and I've heard other queer elders say that too. There's like, oh, we've been through this and it is hard, but there's also the joyous part of it of being
Mhm.
100% authentic, being yourself. And I want to talk about Josie Tallchief, who is our queer Two Spirit elder, who I loved hearing my mother talk about how fabulous Josie
Mhm.
was. Um, and just, I can just imagine them, kikiing together. Like
Mm.
my mom was a kiki, like down. And so I can just imagine them, and I just can see her sitting on her bench in Pahuska at the dances, and I just want to hold the space for Josie Tallchief
Mm.
because she really was a boomer who was trans,
Mhm.
and can you imagine?
Oh.
Can you
The
imagine
resilience on that
in
one. I
in Oklahoma? The same with Bill,
Mhm.
with
Oh yeah,
Mr.
Bill was
Fletcher.
a Catholic gay Osage, full blood, like
They were all Catholics, like, like it's
uh-huh.
that's why that is also why I love Oklahoma so much because we're so intertwined
Oh, we
within
are.
colonialism. But then we're also like, okay, I'm gonna be this and be up at the church and be
We're gonna be at
Mr.
all those things.
Catholicism.
Mhm.
Yes. It's just
Hmm.
complex.
Oh yeah. So,
But yeah,
and to
Josie
kind of talk
taught
about,
you.
embracing what Josie, did for me. That's kind of goes back to what I was saying about what queer elders did for me. They see that what they've been through reflected in us as young people, and they'd be like, "Oh, honey, you're going down that self-hatred path. Like, let me help you out real quick, so you don't have to go through what I went through." That's what Josie essentially modeled for me. They passed away by the time I was already out in Oklahoma City, so I wasn't able to be there in all those ways that I wanted to be. But Josie was a figure that I watched from a distance, and the way they'd laugh, the way they'd go around and challenge people, their relationship with people that I respected, like Margie Williams. Margie called Josie Mumsy because the
Yeah.
way that they practiced their self-love was something that was tangibly having effects on the people around them. And that's something that I always hear people say in like our land back movements and rematriation movements, is that when you practice self-love as an indigenous person, the land is allowed then to love itself again. When you're practicing self-love, the land is allowed to remediate you again. It's allowed to heal you again. Love, self-love, especially for indigenous peoples in those ways, is prevention. It's suicide prevention. It's substance abuse
Yes.
prevention. And it's promotion of our culture. It's promotion of self-expression, because that's what sovereignty is ultimately self-expression. So, Josie was a sovereigntist, probably one of the most extremist sovereigntists that we
Yes.
had in our tribe, because she understood the paradigm that it really took to really embody sovereignty on a real tangible way. Ever since 2006, that's something we all talk about, and we're very proud of our Constitution. Well, that's something I feel like in our Constitution, we have that inalienable rights to practice our religion, to practice all these different things. And if people like us, Two-Spirit people like us, Myohoge people like us have always been here, this is a religious identity. Being queer is a religious expression. This is something that is older than even the terms queer. This is something that's older than even the terms gay, lesbian, all these different things. And that's something too, like, for me to understand these things, I had to see it practice in real life, which is, I'm glad I had Josie. But I also had to understand it in a writing kind of way. To me, I like this idea of like, movements having playbooks. And, to me, Josie embodied the play. And luckily, we have the books to understand those things. John Joseph Matthews wrote about those kettle carriers back in the day. And Dr. Tinker, he has a whole essay about it too, about those kettle carriers being queer coded people, which tells me that, our queerness was in our people before colonialism. It is native, indigenous to our expressions. It wasn't until we started policing
100%.
it. Oh, yes. And, and understanding that and watching it happen real time with Josie was like the most important thing ever. Because if people like me lose the ability to express ourselves, then our sovereignty really isn't truly sovereign. It goes down to the
Exactly.
fundamental basics of that. To be queer, to be trans, to be these things, it involves a paradigm shift that says, no, I'm going to identify with something that promotes my existence, not identify with something designed to erase people like me. And that's an act of
Yes.
sovereignty. That's an act of real ruminant love, self-love. And that's why I always tell
Yeah.
everybody, whenever people ask, how can you support, or how could I support people like you, when they ask me that, I always tell them the only way you can truly support me is by supporting yourself, having that self love to say, I don't want to see you policed anymore, because I know how that felt back in the day when somebody policed me. We've all been policed for our gender expressions. We're either not man enough or not woman enough or something in between. And, and that's something that we can all gather behind and say, we don't want this no more. We don't want this for our kids. We don't want these for all these different things, because it's not Indian to us. It's not
Yeah.
native to us. And I think that when you show up for yourself, that is something that's going to allow you to be able to show up for somebody like me in a real holistic way. And I've seen no sage leaders do that.
Yeah.
Non-queer leaders do that.
Yeah.
Just to kind of shout out somebody, like John Shaw, like of all people, a man has walked up to me and they asked me about what I'm new to this, but he goes, but I know this is important. What is your pronouns? What would you like me to address you as? Do you still want me to call you nephew, or would you rather me call you something in between? And that opened the
Oh,
floodgates of conversations for me. Yes, like that was one of the most
oh,
amazing moments because John Shaw's like around that drum. He's steeped in that culture, and even he
yes.
understood. And that's the thing. He self loves himself and his culture enough to know that when he promotes somebody like me, he's promoting our culture. Because
I love
I
to
could become
hear
another Josie.
that.
Yes, it's
I
it's
love
it's
to
one of
hear
those
that.
things.
I grew up in Wichita with John and Jerry. Beth was my librarian when I was in fourth grade. And
Mhm.
so I grew up with John. Jerry Shaw, his father, would pick up all the Indian kids after school, and we
Aw.
would go. The Wichita, his students, his Wichita State University students would tutor us. He had a tutoring program for all the Indian kids in Wichita. And so when I was back home in March and got to talk to John, and he was like, introduced me to his wife. He's like, "Oh my God, John, Pam, this is Amy. She grew up in Wichita, and we used to take them, to our house." And so I have really fond memories of John and Jerry and Beth. But that makes me so happy because I have questions about our candidates because we are in an Osage election cycle. But first, before we get into that, I wanted to go back to Josie because Josie was called
Mhm.
to run for Congress.
Mhm.
And you can watch these videos, video of Josie talking to the Osage News about her
Mhm.
candidacy. And, you
Even
know,
the debates
her
too,
just,
yeah.
yeah, her just having this calling, like her ancestors were like, you don't have a choice, kind of like, we need you to do this. And she was called. And, you know, trans people, two spirit, queer people are connected to God, no matter
Oh, yeah.
what certain people want you to believe that it is ungodly to be trans or gay or queer, whatever, is just not true. And so her being
Mhm.
that for so many, seeing that, those seeds that were, spilt on the ground with
Mm.
her just even just running for Congress was so powerful
Mm.
for, little Osage kids to see, so
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to shout out Josie Tall Chief, gone too soon,
Oh, yeah.
unfortunately, and so we have to pick up where Josie left off. When I was
Mm.
reading about Josie being a boomer, I was like, what? Thinking, I don't know what the generation, we always hear Gen Z and the alphas and, Gen X and
Yeah.
boomer. What is before boomer? Before boomer was called the silent generation, which makes so much sense. That was the
Mm.
people, they worked hard, the wartime World War II people. They didn't talk about anything, right? And I feel
Yeah.
like some people, because we were raised, my mom was in the silent generation, and a lot of people in Oklahoma where we don't talk about things, right? We don't
Right.
talk about sex or your body, like so many of us, like we didn't learn, like, oh, we don't talk about those things, either through, colonialism, obviously, colonization, boarding schools. There were certain things that were, beat into our elders that you didn't talk about
Mhm.
your body or you didn't talk about things. And hearing Josie, having Klinefelter syndrome, where
Yeah.
going to doctors back in those days, having this birth defect, and like the doctor just telling her parents, raise them as a boy,
Right.
and having like scientific XXY chromosome, like it's just, the silent generation. I feel like there's so much that people don't talk about still. And so I love talking about opening these doors, of our bodies, of our orientation,
Mhm.
of our expression. It's so important, especially for people in the South, for people in Oklahoma. So just Thank you, Josie Tall Chief, and we hope we are making you proud.
Yeah.
um,
Oh yeah. That's
yeah.
something too. I think one of the most biggest things that I remember from her was how she is the originator for Tulsa Two Spirit. One of the originators.
Yes.
John
Also,
Hawk.
Two Spirit, the first time I ever, sorry to interrupt, the first time I ever heard Two Spirit was from Josie.
Mm-hmm.
I had
Mm-hmm.
never heard that term ever in my life.
Same here. So yes, and
Like,
she
it's
used to put
like I
on.
never heard that term. Like,
Mhm.
wow. Yeah. Sorry to
And
interrupt.
no, you're good. And she is the originator of Tulsa Two Spirit. She also used to put on Two Spirit powwows up in the Osage Hills back in the day. And and shout out like Big Russ, because he would gather
Yes.
like drummers back then, and they'd go out there to us, and he wouldn't tell them, what it was for. He would just kind of drop these guys, whether they supported or not,
Ah, I want
onto this whole
to
deal.
go.
And he said, you know what, a gig's a gig, and we're getting paid for it
Okay.
because Josie, she had money. So she's like,
Okay.
I don't care how y'all act. Like, I'm going to pay y'all to shut up at least and get these songs sang so we
T.
can have some fun out here. Again, putting that
T.
play part into playbooks. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
that. Like Josie really knew how to do that. And the reason why I know about that history, luckily, is because, some of her friends from back then are still alive, like John Hawk. John Hawk was featured on HBO.
yes.
We Were Here
Yes.
for their drag show. So, John Hawk's also Osage. And they remember a lot of that stuff. They remember a lot of that change happening real time. And John Hawk is another one of those elders that I can, lean on because everything that they've done before I showed up is the reason why I'm here. John Hawk is actually
Yes.
the reason why I've heard that word "bechoge" first, and I started venturing into what that word means. And I've heard Osages say, "Oh, that's not an Osage word; that comes from somewhere else," and I don't disagree. I think that over there at Oto we use the same word for Two Spirit people, "mechoge." So I think it is something, that's way older than probably any of us can really remember. And back to what you said about that silent generation, we come from a culture and from ancestors who had to bury things to survive. We hear
Yep.
a lot about burying those bundles. We've heard a lot about burying our relatives in our articles like that to keep moving forward. And, I think that's part of the reason why that word is now lost to ambiguity because a lot of those people had to hide themselves to survive. You know what I mean? And you can
Yep.
even still see it nowadays. Bill Sams's obituary doesn't really acknowledge his queer, identity. But
Right.
yeah, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, he's still a queer ancestor. And I think
Yeah.
that his story will be continued on through these right here. Through these
Yes.
moments where people like me and you are talking and we share those stories and we pass them on to the next generation. There's a lot of children now that look to me the same way I used to look to Josie. The willingness to go out there and be your true self, it gives those kids that permission to do it too. I really do think
Yes.
Josie, when she said, she wants to see an Osage Renaissance, I think this is what she's talking about. This
Yes, I
right here,
agree.
you know what I mean?
Yes.
This time that we're in right now, we're in a time where it seems like everybody, not even just Osages, but we're longing for like a joyful resistance. We're so isolated because of the internet. We're so, everything is just so grim. And it seems like nowadays being happy and being joyous is like the most important act of resistance we can have right now. And I think the reason back
Yes.
to like Duchamp and Dadaism, the reason why Dadaism is hosted by MoMA right now is because subconsciously even non-natives are longing for that type of resistance too. You know what I mean? I think that's something all of us can really like look at and interrogate and say, you know what? Like it is like heavy like right now to live in this time, but you know what? Going out and dancing, having fun, kikiing around, all of those different things, like that is the most important thing you can do. Build kin, not kingdoms. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
put the Kiki in Ken, honey.
Yes.
Literally. But you know what I mean?
Well,
That's kind of where I think that she was wanting us to
yes.
go. And I'm trying to embody
Yeah.
that the best way I can.
I think you are. And it's those little things of joy that bring us out. I started this podcast after the last inauguration, Trump's inauguration last year. I
Mm,
was, becoming isolated, like my mind. I was watching TV, I was watching the fires in LA. I was
yeah.
just deep in like the, the cycle of news. It was bad. I was like, okay, bitch, you need to figure out you're only spiraling downward. What can
Literally.
you do? Right? What can I do? And it's just like I love my community, right? I have to go into my community. So I started writing. I've been was tinkering with doing a podcast for years, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna do it, and whatever it is gonna be what it is.
Mm.
And so I just went into my community to show how amazing and beautiful we are and all the incredible things that we're doing,
Oh, yeah.
all those things that Josie had talked about. Like we have such a vibrant community all over Indian
Hmm.
country. I moved to New York in the year 2000, and seeing the urban indigenous community grow so much from the time
Mm.
I've been here is astounding, and hearing them and then going home and seeing all the amazing things that's happening in Oklahoma because of people like you and
Mm.
Josie,
And don't
and
forget
so
John.
oh, and John.
And John. We see you,
Okay.
John. You be out
Oh,
here.
okay. Oh,
Uh-huh.
definitely. Well,
Gorgeous.
me and JP. Me and JP.
Hmm.
That's
Oh,
I
yeah.
live.
Oh,
So,
yes.
but right now, we kind of touched on this earlier. The Osage Nation, we are in an election cycle. It's
Hmm.
juicy, it's fun, it
It's
brings out the best
everything
and
that
worst in
comes with
people.
it.
Yes. Um,
Yes.
so for those who don't know, the Osage Nation is, like I said, in an election cycle. We are to elect a new chief, assistant chief, Congress members, and our Osage Minerals Council.
Hmm.
I've
All
been
of the
trying to
things.
keep up all the things. So I've been trying to keep up with the debates. I always rely heavily on asking family back home because
Hmm.
I want to vote in who's the best for people on the res, right?
Right.
Also, they know the tea. So
Oh,
I'm always clocking in. What's the tea? What's the
there's
real?
a lot of
Give me
tea
the
going on.
real version of what's going on,
Uh-huh.
So I wanted to ask, have any of the current candidates, mentioned that, people running for Congress, for chief, assistant chief, have any of them outwardly said they align with queer and two-spirit citizens of the Osage Nation or just in general? Have there been
Hmm.
any that you can, because I want to shout them out and I also want to know for me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, no, I hear that, girl. Stay educated.
I mean,
And,
we love John Shaw. John Shaw did
we
his
love
big
John
one with
Shaw.
that.
Like, John Shaw's already, like, top of the list there because they actually went out of their way to do that. But as far as candidates who have outwardly expressed, that they want to support these kinds of things, I would also say Alice Goodfox. Alice
Yeah,
Goodfox
love
is,
Alice.
oh yes, she's of the people. That one is, and
Yeah.
Alice, a lot of people don't really realize this, but you can really tell which ones are about that life and which ones aren't from back in 2016 when we had that vote for inclusion of gay marriage.
Right.
So look who voted on that. And that'll tell you who is for it and who's against it. Alice Goodfox was one of the champions to get that going, and I remember I got on the phone with her because I call Alice for like a lot of things. We're Osage, we have a way of doing everything. You know what I mean? There's a way of doing everything. So before I do most of anything, I either one consult my sponsor. shout out my sponsor, who's Osage, or two, AA, they're gonna remain anonymous, but
Shout
two,
out, yes.
shout, you know who you are. But anyways, but two, I go to people like Alice. I go to other people who are leaders in our community, and I ask them for their opinion before I do anything, like even stuff like this, my art, all those kinds of stuff, because I want it peer reviewed by Osages who know what's going on, and I want to make sure that I'm doing something worthwhile. They always say, "Don't make more ghosts. This land already has enough of that." So that's my way of making
Yes.
sure I don't, is I go and I consult my people to make sure I'm doing something out of love and not out of just hate. You know what I mean? So Alice is one of those ones because she reminded me she wanted to have that done and asked the people to vote on it because she felt like Congress, who was sitting in it at the time, was not going to actually be able to have an honest discussion about it. So, and
Yeah.
and that's the thing there. So whenever it comes to that vote, she even told me, she goes, I don't feel right the fact that, only people like Joe and her could go up to the tribe and get legally married and not somebody like me. She didn't feel that was right. That's something
Yeah.
that's not fair, So out of
It's not.
solidarity, it's not. And out of solidarity, she wanted to do that. She said, if I can do this, but somebody else can't, then we're all not free here. Something's got to change. So she went and
Exactly.
championed those kinds of movements. And I know Jody Revard is another one. That's what, like,
Oh,
again, why.
yes.
But she's not really. I don't think she's running right now. She's already staying on
She's
Congress.
not.
Yeah, but
She's
still,
not.
she's still of the people.
But she's an
And then
ally.
she is an ally, hardcore. And then people like William Fenton. William Fenton actually walks up to me and goes out of his way to really address me and talk to me about those kinds of things. William is a little bit more on like the technical side of understanding things. He's a veteran too,
Yes.
and used to
Yeah.
work for NASA and all those good things. So his approach to like queer rights and everything, he's just like, well, it's not scientifically backed, for one. He's like, so I got no business endorsing it. He goes, but two, at the end of the day, everybody needs to have those basic liberties and basic freedoms. So William
Yeah.
has been another one that's like, he's promoted it in his own language. Like I said, Will just has a different way of approaching life. He talks differently because he's a scientist. And then
Yes.
aside from them, those are the only really standout people that's actually came out of their way to talk to me about these issues, and who actually gives me space to talk to them in an honest way. Everybody else, either I just kind of gauge it from past votes, or they don't really see it as really much of a sovereignty problem. You know what I mean? I've actually had to get into
Right.
those kind of discussions with people too. And I'm not going to name names on like who's homophobic and who's not, you know what I mean? But like, I have had discussions with candidates about like these kinds of issues, and they always tell me, well, it's not really a sovereign issue. There's nothing the Osage Nation could really do to stop the state. And I'm like, technically you could. And I said, again, back to what
Yeah.
Alice said earlier, like, nobody's actually ever really, as far as to my knowledge still, and when I talked to Alice back then, nobody has actually gone up to the tribe and got married. Straight, gay, nobody has actually done that. Most people just get married to the state and call it good, but it's a principle. That's what Alice stood on.
Exactly.
It's the principle. Even if nobody goes up there and does it, it's about the principle. The fact that we
Right.
could, if we wanted to, is what matters. So, a lot of these people don't see it that way, because it does cost money to, write these bills. It costs money to do all those different things. So
But I feel that that only strengthens our sovereignty
it
when
does.
we give our citizens the freedom and the rights to get married if we want. That only strengthens and
Mm-hmm.
grounds our sovereignty more. I watched the Osage News debates with the Congress, and there was a question about
Mm-hmm.
what do you feel about the Oklahoma anti-LGBTQIA plus bills going around, and it was on the third rotation. I forget, they had 3 different
It's like say they had a
panels.
lot of rotations. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was the last one, and William Fenton was on that, and he was like, I don't think anyone should, police us. That's a form of colonization. So of course my ears perked up. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, okay, he's talking my language. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he's very scientific. There was another lady who was kind of making it about your idea or your choice is your choice. I have a gay son, I have a gay this. So, people were
You get
doing their
that.
I was like,
Yes.
oh, like for them, I'm sure that's like, oh, well, I have a gay son. So I believe people their choice is their choice. Right. So, baby steps.
Baby steps.
Um,
It
but I
it is
would
very much baby steps.
love it's very baby steps. And again, it's going back to that silent generation, right? Um, we're still living under the silent generation. Like this new the new generation needs to not be silent so
Oh
much
yeah.
and talk about these things, because there are people that want to hear this, and I think it's important for people to hear
Hmm.
this.
And
um
and to me, I agree with you. I really think that's like what it comes down to. When you promote your queer relatives as Osage people, you're making sure that our culture is going on into the future. That's the
yes,
thing, Josie has done so much. Bill Sams by themselves has done so much for our people that, our
yeah,
head rights wouldn't be the way that it is without Bill Sams and his voice.
right. And they
A
loved
lot
our
of
people.
And they
Even if
loved our
our
people. Like the
people
most selfless
didn't love
people I can
them.
think of are queer people. Like, if
Yes,
y'all want things to survive, like promote
they
your
were
little gay
hated
son or like
on.
promote your little trans, nephews and nieces and nibblings. Like, I promise you,
Yes.
they are going to be champions of our culture. I know they are. And that's
Yes.
the thing. I'm not going to out any of these queer youth, but like, there's kids that I know that are change makers. I watched them do all kinds of
Yes.
different things, and they come up to me and they're just like, I want to identify like that. I just don't know how my parents feel. And I said, you know what? You are already. You don't have to tell nobody. Just live your
Yeah.
life. There's no
Yeah.
reason to come out of a closet because that closet is colonial. Our people used to just promote
Yes.
each other and just live our truths. So do that. And they do. I don't know if they've ever had to come out of the closet to their relatives, to their peers that are young too, but I know to me, they don't have to. I tell them all the time,
Exactly.
that's on your terms, and whenever they do that and they practice that self love, I see them go further. I see them go
Oh,
bigger than what they were doing beforehand. So I know like our culture is going to be much more enriched when you allow
yes.
those type of worldviews to come in. Because again, like what I said about Josie, when you're trans and when you choose to live your life like this, we embody sovereignty more than anybody because we know what it's like to be sovereign even in the face of colonial violence. We know what it's like to be sovereign even in the face of domestic violence. We know how to be sovereign in all those different facets and we know that it matters. So yes, like there are some candidates who know that.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. And I love that the youth back home have you to turn to and to come to, and you have just such a positive, intelligent force, and loving. Like you have love pouring from you, and that's what we need, like what everyone needs. So
Hmm.
I'm so happy you're there for them.
Hey, like that song, What the World Needs Now is
Needs
Love,
okay.
Sweet Love.
Yes.
It's the only
Always,
thing.
it's all about love, honey. It's all about
It
love. That's all this
is.
is. The real tea is
Literally all
children.
about
It's
love.
all about love. All religions, all walks of life, everything. It all goes back to loving each other.
Hmm.
Love the earth, love the ground, the grass, your relatives, your tree relatives, your animal. It's all about love.
All of them.
Like,
Hmm.
it's so simple. It's literally so simple. And
Hmm.
somehow we've gotten to, but it's still there, and love will always prevail.
It
I
will.
wanted to ask you about what can we do, what can the Osage Nation do to better protect and create safe spaces for our LGBTQ plus A community and the youth
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
community? Like, is there anything that we can do or that we're doing right now?
So I think first and foremost is I believe that kind of piggybacking what you said earlier, if we are going to actually say we're sovereign, then we need to embody that sovereignty. And and I've seen people be up in arms over things like signs. Those signs that was taken down by Kevin Stitt that says you're now entering the Osage Nation. People are very up in arms over our sovereignty and expression of a sign. But yet, when it comes to
Yeah.
bathroom policing, nobody's really up at arms over that. You know what I mean? And I think that
Right.
that is a way to actually exercise our sovereignty, is to say, you know what, here in Osage Reservation, we don't give a damn who you are. Like, use the bathroom, girl. Like,
Yeah.
you know
You
what
gotta
I
go to the
mean? Like,
O. You gotta go to the O,
you
honey.
gotta go to the O. We don't care if there's a big line at the women's restroom. Run into the men's. Like, you know
You
what I
better get
mean?
in there and use the bathroom.
Like if there's a bathroom, use it, girl. Like to me, that's just the most simple act of sovereignty, especially when the alternative is just so hell-bent on erasing things. You know what I mean? So that's one thing. I feel like just enacting that and saying, like, at least here in the reservation, we have open bathroom policy. Like, to make sure that
Yes.
people like me are actually affirmed, that children are actually affirmed. Because the thing is people like me, I don't really face the immediate brunt policing of bathrooms. Yes, sometimes, there's offshoots where you have a white folk that, like, is like, sir, you need to go to your assigned bathroom. Like, I've actually had that before. But, really the people who are most affected by it are those kids in those schools.
Yes.
The reality of what happened with Next Benedict in those bathrooms, that was
Yeah.
a form of bathroom policing. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
if we are really going to sit here and say that we need to promote our youth, then making sure that school has safe space for our queer youth to actually express themselves and love themselves is first and foremost preserving our culture, like we've already established here in this podcast. So that bathroom,
Yes.
freedom of bathrooms is like, it may seem so minuscule, but it is literally so
Oh,
important. You
it
know what I
is. It's
mean?
the littlest thing, but it could be the
It's the
biggest
littlest thing, but it's the
impact.
biggest. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's just one facsimile of it. The other part of it too is I think our health system needs to be more queer inclusive. I think having
Yeah.
actual programs designed and focused for queer youth, queer people, queer AA circles. You know what I mean? That's something that I'm trying to get going
Yes.
myself too. Queer spaces for not just natives, but for all queer people in our with that resides within our reservation. I feel like all of them
Yeah.
should have access to free, spaces to find each other and to say, we need to heal. I think AA is a
Yes.
good way to do that. And I always tell people that all the time. Like, trans folks don't need AA. AA needs more trans people. That's the
Yes.
that is the distinction there. You know what I mean? So I think that
Yeah.
is another thing, promoting and having money aside for those kinds of programs, and having educating our employees the need of promoting those kinds of programs too. Because I do work for our medical side of things. I work at PRT, and I am the only gender nonconforming person out there in our program. And I tell them all the time, like, if we're gonna have people like come in here, because it's very binary in its structure. There's a men's house, there's a women's house,
Right.
there's all these different things. And I ask them, what's going to happen when we have a non-binary client come through here? Are we going to
Yeah.
deny them their ability to get sober because they don't meet a colonial's narrative of binary? Like, what
Yeah.
happens? You know what I mean? And like, and the thing is that even is expressed down to the way you apply to jobs around here. And even an Osage Nation job, application, it asks you, are you a man or a woman? Or I prefer not to say. Well, actually, I would
Yeah.
prefer to say, but let's disguise erasure like inclusivity. You know what I mean?
Right.
So all of these small,
Exactly.
minuscule things, super, you know what I mean? It's violence to people like me, because it's
Yeah.
essentially saying you have rights up until it's inconvenient for us. You're
Yeah.
sovereign until it's inconvenient for the rest of the people. And that's
Right.
kind of a thing. Like, I'm having to constantly negotiate my sovereignty with my own people. And it's And that's the thing here is it tries to superimpose itself like we're in conflict with each other. But you and I have already established here, actually, my liberation is very tied to everybody's, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I've noticed, that when I encounter opposition from our own people, it's basically Osages fighting for the right to stay oppressed. Yeah.
Totally.
And I'm just
Make it
like,
make sense.
but that's the thing is, I can also empathize with that because, whenever like I said earlier, I'm the most transphobic person I know because I had to learn how to police myself. So whenever somebody like Josie basically told me, like, actually, the sky is green, honey, to me, I was just like, hold up, wait, if everything's, not actually true, what else is, you know what I mean? And it goes into this whole big
Right.
spiral. So I understand that's scary. You know what I
It's
mean? When people
scary. Your
experience,
fundamental values of what you've been taught or, tricked into believing through colonialism
uh-huh,
is challenged by Alex.
uh-huh. And I'm just like, you know what?
Like,
I
where,
understand. Like, I get it. I was like that too at one point in time. When I came out, literally, here's the thing. When I came out of the closet, I remember screaming at the top of my lungs to my family, I'm not like them. I'm not like the crazy people who are dressing up in whole, other outfits. I'm not like them because I understood I'm disendowing a type of safety with my family in that act of coming out. So if
right.
I was like, by the way, I'm also trans too, I couldn't love myself at that moment, let alone believe that my family was going to still love me. You know what I
Right.
mean? There was a whole other closet that still
You
exists,
were
even when I was
in.
coming out of the closet. Believe me, I can fully empathize with somebody being scared of that because I have felt
Yes.
that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's the
Wait,
thing here is if
I,
we can
I,
stand up for these things, we try to embody that liberation, So that's my thing is just small implications of our constitution in bathrooms and all of these different things that I've mentioned here. That it
yes.
basically anytime the state tries to come out with something anti-trans, we should be coming out with something that affirms it just as fast. Like that's the way my brain thinks because that's the only way we're going to have real sovereignty here. We say it all the
Yes.
time. We learn from immigrant activists that we don't cross borders, the border crossed us. Well, the binary works
Exactly.
the same way. I didn't cross the binary. The binary crossed me, honey. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's kind of like my
Yes.
way of thinking. I think our legislators, our leaders, need to have honest discussions with these things. And if they're not able to
Yeah.
do it amongst their own peers, I think it is time for them to seek out people like us, these
Yeah.
people who are willing, because I know you're very
Alex,
intertwined with all those things.
I want you to run. We need you. We need you in legislation. We need you everywhere.
Hey, and it
We
literally, I was just, girl,
we
I'm
do.
28. I was just like, hold up, let me like watch what's going on this time around. And then I'm going to try next time around and we're going to see what
Yeah.
happens.
Your voice is so needed and the way you speak and your intelligence is just what we need. And your empathy towards others and also understanding those closets, right, that we've been put in, or those challenging fundamental values being challenged by queer people and two-spirit people. You understand both sides, and I feel like you would just be perfect for politics because of that. You are a bridge, right? I love Jody Revard talking about, you know, becoming a connector, a bridge in the podcast that we did together.
Hmm.
And that just really stuck with me. And I feel like you are that. But I just want everyone to run. I have my own cabinet in my head and you're in it. And Jody is too. Jody's chief.
Hey, just throwing
Okay,
up that sign. I love it.
exactly. Oh, wait, no, I wanted to talk because we kind of were going down the path of wellbriety. I had seen this word before, and I wanted to ask what does wellbriety mean to you? What is that, and how does that help Indigenous people?
Mm. So, sobriety means to me, well, the word kind of implies it. It's wellness and sobriety. And, and that's something that I hear a lot in the spaces that I work in, that recovery and sobriety are two completely different things. Sobriety is just
Okay.
abstaining from a substance, and recovery, being in recovery, is actually saying, hold up, the behaviors that I was exhibiting is something that I cannot embody anymore. So if I'm going to be well, then I need to actually change my behaviors in order to become a good relative. So Wellbriety was started by an organization called the White Bison. You can look up their organizations and everything. And it was essentially started by a bunch of natives who realized that AA is good, but there is a lot of things that natives needed specifically catered to them to be able to actually get sober. Like we acknowledged earlier, like we come from praying people. Like, God is very much a everlasting, entity to us, and we're very reverent and we're very in order, because of those things. So what Sobriety essentially does is it cross-pollinates the message of AA, NA, and all those things that was made by Dr. Bob in the 1920s. And it says, actually, natives had lived by the standards of the 12 steps before colonization. It wasn't until those systems were dismantled that we started living the life of a colonized addict. So,
Of course. Of
Wellbriety,
course.
of course. So,
Of
so
course.
Wellbriety is something, it's a reclamation. It's a call back to home for a lot of natives, and saying, that our ways are like what I said earlier, our ways are suicide prevention. Our ways are substance abuse prevention. Our ways is domestic abuse, prevention. It is prevention at its finest. And only by actually acknowledging that and learning how to heal through those ways can we move forward. So it's very structured, like I said, like a 12-step program. We have our own program, steps too, that mirrors the 12 steps. The only difference is they put it in a circle. Because,
Love.
natives love a circle. But,
We love it. We don't like right angles. Forget the right
uh-huh.
angles is so colonial. Like, please.
Literally, we love a good circle. We don't do 90
Love a
degrees.
circle.
Hey, but
We
anyway,
love
so,
round. Yeah, no right angles.
360, honey. But anyway, so, that structure, instead of it being like a list that goes up and down, 1 through 12, the circle makes it to where you're always doing the 12 steps every day. Starts off step 1 all the way to
Love.
step 12 every day. So,
Genius.
it is. And that's kind of what makes our program at PRT very different compared to any other program in the state. We essentially, I mean, we only open up to other natives. You have to have a CDIB to be there, but we implement Wellbriety and have it as an option for natives to be able to use to help them out. And we unify that with sweat. We unify that with all these different things. And I know there's other tribes out there that do that too. Ponca does it, and Pawnees do it, and those Cheyenne Arapahoes down there and down south have like they really have a huge Wellbriety community. And there's a community in Tulsa too. That's actually where I discovered Wellbriety, and I discovered it in a time when I wasn't ready to heal. I'll be honest. I was actually going to Wellbriety meetings for a snag back then. And they
Okay.
know who they are.
Gee.
So, like just being honest, like, like just being brutally honest here.
Sometimes the snags just
Some,
be at the
Sometimes the
Wellbriety.
snags, and I think that creator put them in my path for me to be where I'm at now.
For a reason.
For a
Yes.
reason, you know what I mean? Because they did introduce me to Wellbriety, and for that, I am eternally grateful to them for that.
Yes.
Because my life has been so much more enriched when I found Wellbriety and has actually started living by its simple program. I mean, it's very simple, so is AA. And that's the thing, is this program, it's a we program, not a me program. And AA says that too, because it acknowledges that when I am well, when I am taking care of myself and I'm honoring myself, then my community is honored. And, going back to this idea of like, ready-mades and Dadaism and all these different things, to me, I'm very much like this idea of like cross-pollinating everything. I'm very queer in the way I approach things. I started getting my standards and everything less straight and more queer. And that means that, whenever I started living well, then I was able to actually honor all of creation. When you're sober, when you're living by that Wellbriety, or what they call walking that red road, then the entire world becomes a ready-made. And the way that I see that practiced is in our sweat. We bring those lava rocks in, those grandpas as we call them, in there, and we pray with them. You know what I mean? We pray with them, and have that active relationship with Creator through those things. And to me, the principle of calling them grandpas and treating them as such is the same principle as making a ready-made. You're applying higher meaning, higher context onto something. And that's the foundation of our culture. We apply higher meaning, higher context to everything. You know what I mean? You
Yes.
can't even set a
Yeah.
table without, you know what I mean? Without
Right.
doing it in a certain way. Like
Yes.
everything is a ready-made by the way I see things.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? That's just me.
Yes.
I'm not trying to superimpose my ways onto nobody else. That's just my artistic view of what we do and why we do it. You know what I mean? And it
Yeah,
makes
but
it
what
more
is also
understandable
cool
to
is
me.
that you're seeing the interconnectedness of things,
Hmm.
right? Of
Oh yeah.
this art, movement, and then you're seeing it in nature and you're seeing it in your culture and how it's literally all connected.
It's all
And
literally.
that's when your brain connects to like, oh, okay, things in nature happen here and then happen here and then in my culture, which is all also so, is nature. But even through art, you like realize that it all is so interconnected. And that's when I
Hmm.
think that light bulb goes off in my head when I recognize that. It's such a
Hmm.
special feeling that just connects you to, you know, earth and God and just
Hmm.
everything, right? And that's
Everything.
such a beautiful feeling to have when you're like it all connects and it's like this light bulb goes off in your head.
Mm.
I love that feeling.
Yes, no,
Um
it's a
okay,
real eureka moment.
yes, Alex, a simple question. What brings you joy?
Mm. I'm gonna have a very complex answer for a simple question. Hey,
Love that. Love that.
so for me, what brings me joy is this idea of coming home, especially coming home every day when I wake up and I give myself to God. I wake up every morning. That's what I had to do to keep myself sober. Is I put myself in order. I wake up and I pray, and I thank God for my life, my sobriety, my freedom, because those three things are something not everybody's granted every day. There are people who are arrested sitting in prison cells right now for being like me. There are people who are sitting in prison cells right now that come from the American Indian movement. There are people who are sitting in prisons right now for a variety of reasons, and even just for the most basic of reasons. And to me, to make sure that I can live my life to the fullest for them is what brings me ultimately joy. Because, like we talked about throughout this entire podcast, what brings me joy is this idea that I get to love and say joy is my birthright. Joy is all of
Yes.
our birthrights.
Yep.
It's joy and love is what we were born into this world to practice. And I think that as an Osage person, that's something that I've witnessed throughout my entire life. I've witnessed intergenerational joy change people's lives for the better. And, one of the things that I think about a lot is this prayer that I heard that was prayed over my grandpa because he was a veteran in World War II. And while he was at war, they were still doing his birthday meetings while he was gone. And one of the things that my grandma told me they said in there was they want him to grow old. They want him to have a big family, and they want him to come home and get so old that his hair becomes as gray as those ashes in that fire. And that's a prayer that I
Wow.
hear a lot, and I use that nowadays. Those words have managed to go across time, have managed to live beyond even my grandpa's life, and I use it for kids in our sweat. I use it for other kids too. That type of unbreakable chain, you know what I mean, that has connected me to Osages from the past and even Osages in the future. You know what I mean? This work that I'm doing right now, I have to stop acting like happiness and joy and all these things come out of pain. That's a scam. You know what I mean? Joy and happiness can come right now. You can choose to embody those things and bring heaven right here in the present just by embodying those things. And when you do that, when you choose to live in love and joy rather than what society, is trying to impose, that nihilism. When you do that, you include yourself into this unbreakable chain of love that spans across time. You know what I mean? And when I do that, that's enough
Yes.
for me to feel like, what I'm doing right now is divine. It's God conscious. You know what I mean? Like you said earlier, being queer is something that was given to us by God. And I have a poem I wrote about this too. God made me two-spirit. God made me mechoge for the same reason he made shells and stones but didn't make beads. And the same reason he made corn but he didn't make hominy. Because humanity gets to share in that act of creation. And by participating in that act of creation on a daily basis and being reverent of it, that's when you're able to transcend, all barriers, all binaries, all everything. And you're able to have and embody that love that God has for all of us. We hear it all the time in Christian narratives that Jesus is love, Jesus is unity, Jesus is all these different things. And to me, that's what brings me joy every day is whenever I love myself, that's the land loving itself. And to me, that's something bigger than me. AA, Wilbriety, all these things really emphasize this idea that I'm powerless. I was powerless over my addiction. I was powerless over everything. And, my elders always tell me, put God in these ways ahead of you. Don't get ahead of them or you'll fall off that red road. So that's my way of doing that and practicing that on a daily basis is by sitting there and, acknowledging that I get to be alive today. I get to be free. I get to be sober. I get to have all these different things because God loves me. And, coming from a community that, well, from my history, I've always heard that God doesn't love people like me. You know what I mean? You hear it in politics, you hear it in the colonial society, and eventually when you hear it so much, you start believing it. So then whenever you find yourself in this position now and you find yourself in this, in that love of your community and intergenerational love, then all of that narrative doesn't mean anything anymore. And to me, that's what I longed for it. I remember going back into that sweat the first time I did, the first thing I prayed for was my family back home, like to have my family back. Because, at the time I was so resentful of everything that I didn't even know how to receive love. You know what I mean? That was a whole thing. You can't give away the thing you don't have. You know what I mean? So when I did that, instead of just giving them back to me immediately, those rocks put me on a journey of self-recovery, self-discovery. And I found Wilbriety, I found those steps, and I got my family back that way. So, so to me, to solve that powerlessness problem that I had over my addiction in my life, I had to really believe in something bigger than myself. And that thing is that intergenerational love. Love is everything, like we said.
Love is everywhere. Yes. That made me joyful to hear you say all of those beautiful words together. I know that you are in the Tallgrass residency? That's where you're at right now? Or that you were?
I just got back from there. I was just there, yes.
And I wanted to talk about what were some of the things that you were doing at the Tallgrass residency, which is part of our old ancestral lands for the Osage, correct?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
What were some of the
So,
programs that you were doing?
Yeah, so the Tallgrass residency was a 9-day residency, and it was set in Matfield Green, which is right in the heart of the Flint Hills. And you're right, that is some of our old ancestral lands. And while I was there, I found a lot of very interesting stories about Osages. Black Dog's Band was notorious around Matfield Green, and I found around Cottonwood Falls and even up until Strong City, like they were very notorious around there for, we were strong people. We weren't gonna take no
Yes.
shit and we'd kill people. Like that's just how that goes.
Yes.
Stand on business. So, anyways, so
Okay.
Black Dog, very much was a huge role out there. And one of the things I was there to talk about, my program that they wanted me to do, is what I call the land of milk and honey. So the land of milk and honey is this phrase that originates from back in the Old Testament, specifically around the story of Israelites being freed by their God and sent to the land of Canaan, to essentially displace the indigenous peoples of their lands and cultures. God made this a divine decree onto his people. And that narrative, that metaphor, is the basis for a lot of the ways that we exist in this world nowadays. It's also the basis for Indian law as we know it, which a lot of people aren't familiar with Indian law as it is. But, the reason why it's cemented in our Indian law is because back in the 1400s, you had this decree by the Pope that was called a papal bull. Essentially, paraphrase it, is essentially saying that any nation that is not a Christian nation is not seen valid in the eyes of God. So only Christian nations have legal claims to this new world, quote unquote, that, has been discovered, quote unquote, again. And they essentially use the phrase, it is the land of milk and honey. It is the paradise. It is the new land of Kenites, which means that we as Indians exist as pagans of this promised land. So, instead of doing a land acknowledgement like, most people always ask natives to do, I actually acknowledged that papable and read it to the audience in my public program and said, this is the actual stage that we exist on. I'm not going to do land acknowledgement. I'm going to acknowledge the papable and the words, harmful words used to describe people like me and how they shape the way we engage with each other. Because, at the end of the day, the papal bull is one thing, but flash forward to the 1700s, you get Johnson v. McIntosh. Johnson v. McIntosh is this court case that essentially started the Trail of Tears. And in that court case, you have a U.S. lawyer cite the papal bulls and say, well, these people aren't actually Christian people. Therefore, in the eyes of God, they're not a legitimate nation. We can do it as we please, And Johnson v. McIntosh has never been overruled. The metaphor of land of milk and honey still remains to this day the foundation of how the United States government interacts with native sovereignty. So, back to that whole word, about this idea in that poem that words are happening. Words don't exist in a vacuum. They exist with subtext and context. Words borrow from ideas beforehand. And the fact that we are still piggybacking off of rhetoric from the 1400s back to Old Testament metaphor shows that we have never actually fully progressed. And it's only by engaging with these words and turning them into something better. Because that's the thing, is I really focused on language and how if language, because the papal bull is a poem, literally. Like the Pope was writing bars and
Right.
So
right.
Literally. So like, like the poet, like it's poems shape the way we interact with the world. And if poems are made to hurt people, then we are all going to be hurting. If poems are made to love and have loving language, then we all thrive. So what I had my program do and focus on is we used hateful rhetoric from the papal bulls. We used hateful rhetoric from old newspaper articles that basically called people like Osage a savage, and everything in between, from anti-trans legislation in Kansas to the newspaper articles about coal brings plenty and books that was very anti-indigenous. And we essentially used all those words to make our own poems, a ready-made poem, if you will. And these poems were designed to love. Yes. So, I was up in a place that I didn't know anybody, and we had a lot of people show up for this program. And, even the organizers from Tallgrass even said, there's some people that showed up today that aren't usually here. So to me, that again goes back to this idea that all of us, no matter what walk of life we come from, we're all longing for this joyous liberation, this joyous rebellion. And that's something I really hammered down to my audience up there is, this idea, the revolution isn't going to be televised. The revolution is going to be counterintuitive, ridiculous, silly, whimsical, all the things that people have tried to describe natives
all the
with.
things.
All the things they've tried to describe us with. And it's going to be lazy, you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, when I fight for the liberation of people and their ability to express themselves, I'm fighting for the ability to chill. Because, the more that we keep on trying to adhere ourselves to these standards of perfectionism, the longer we keep on promoting these type of things that are oppressing us. So in reality, I'm trying to get you to chill out, hon. Like, embrace a little bit of flawness, Like, chill out, girl. It's okay if it don't look perfect. And, and I even have that conversation with people using AI generated prompts. They're like, oh, well, I have all these things to do. I need to get a quick, good looking flyer out for a program. I'm like, well, fuck, make an ugly ass flyer. At
Ew.
least you're saving bottles of water. Like, chill out. You know what I mean? Like,
Hello.
it's not that. It's not
Yes.
that. You know what I mean? We can just make something ugly for a change. And that's the thing is very much is why I embraced Dadaism, because I realized that this hyperfixation on retinal art for the eyes, is what's promoting this hyper generative AI data center thing we're going through right now.
Yes.
Everybody wants to make perfectly good generated picture perfect photos, and no, everybody's scared to look a little flawed. Everybody's scared to look a little
Yeah.
abnormal. And I'm like, you know what? The most
Yeah.
revolutionary thing you can do when any schmuck can make a good photo is make ugly art. Because then at least we know it didn't come from an AI generated prompt.
Oh, and that's tea. And
That is
that's the
tea.
tea.
You know what I mean? So that's the thing
It's
here is
so
we're fighting for the
true.
ability to chill the fuck out. Like, hey, excuse my French, but like, chilling is actually
Yeah.
the most biggest thing we can do, like chilling out.
It's so true. We've all been like subscribed to these ideas of beauty and what we should look like, what we should be like. I
Hmm.
work in fashion, so my day job is I do hair for photo shoots and celebrities and stuff like that. So I
Right.
was talking to one of my favorite makeup artists the other day about how it's a revolution now in Hollywood that if you are fat still, because everyone is on,
Everyone's on
Ozempic, and
Ozempic.
I totally stand behind it. I want it. I need it for the health.
Girl,
I
I
mean,
want my double chin. I want to be plump.
we there are people that need it, right? We have predisposed diabetes from
Right,
colonization.
right.
There are people that really need it, and there are people that don't and are just vain and want to be skinny. But seeing
Hmm.
people fat in Hollywood now is such an act of rebellion, like
It
that
is.
you just don't see them anymore because it is
It's very Dada
just
being fat nowadays.
it's very Dada, or seeing wrinkles, like seeing people with
Yes.
wrinkles now in
Even
Hollywood. Like you're
yes,
like,
like
oh
the
my
creases
God.
in their face from smiling. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
please keep your wrinkles. Like God dang.
Yeah.
Like
I know.
I
It's
want to know you
so our
smile,
minds
honey.
are warped. Yeah. Our minds are warped. Seriously. Um,
Literally. So
okay.
like, there's too much emphasis on healing on like perfectionism nowadays. Like we just need to
Yeah.
chill out. Like for real. Like
Be real. See each other in person. You're not gonna look
uh-huh.
like what your app filter made you look like. And that's
Exactly.
okay.
And that's okay. It's actually beautiful.
Well, I am going to let you go back to your life, but I don't want to because this was such an amazing conversation.
Oh yeah, no, it was so
And I thank you so much for joining me. And I'm so happy that we connected. I am
thank
so
you.
excited to see what's happening next for you. What do you have coming up?
Okay, so
And
next
where can we
is
follow you?
so you can follow me at Alex_DeRoin, spelled like heroin but with a D. DEROIN.
Okay, not
But
not
you can
heroin.
follow
Work.
work. But anyway, so Alex_DeRoin. And then my next projects right now, I'm actually working on this hemp project with a native led hemp organization. So there's that. And then I'm also trying to get this other project going in St. Louis called Queering Cahokia. And we're essentially,
Ooh.
yes. So we're essentially I'm going to be collaborating with some Tulsa Art Fellows, and we're going to be working with some organizations that are queer owned there in St. Louis to talk about queer ecology and that state we come, or that Mound City we come from. Because back to what we've
Yes.
been talking about, this whole deal about those ancestors, that corn, that Yonkapins, and all those things.
Yes.
That Mound City is arguably where this sprang to life too. So we're talking about
Okay.
queer Cahokia and those queer ancestors. And then I'll be showing some art in Tulsa with the Four Mothers Collective. We're having a show called Still Sovereign, and I will be showing a ready-made that I made or that I created, where I'll be showing a Rita J. Jump, who is like a really huge local figure here at Osage. She had a dictionary she typed out on a typewriter on like old banker cards. And it's literally like a dictionary before any Osage dictionary was ever printed. And I found it at an estate sale. Like, it was literally just going
Stop.
to be literally. So I had to, the art behind all that. The poem literally wrote itself, okay? The ready-made
I
was like
mean,
begging,
that's
literally. So I
amazing.
was just like, okay, let me turn you into a ready-made so you could be honored and respected. And so yeah, I've been going through the process of documenting that. So I'm kind of an archivist too on the side right now.
When is that
Yeah,
show?
it'll be in September until November, I want to say, if I'm getting those dates right. But it'll be opening in September at a space called Positive Space Gallery in Tulsa.
Oh, that's
Yes.
amazing. Oh,
Yes, I
okay. And
stay
then
busy.
socials, you said your socials again across all platforms is your name, Alex
Mm-hmm.
underscore
Yeah,
DeRoin.
underscore like a little. Yes.
And we can support you. How can we support you? Is there any art you have for sale? Do you have a website?
So I have a nonprofit website called kinshipmodel.org. I respond from there pretty regularly. And I do have art for sale. Way I do that is just kind of like a DM basis. So if you're interested in something, you can just message me directly and I'll on Instagram, Facebook, whatever, and I'll work with you from there, get it mailed out, and we usually just do payments through Cash App. It's the easiest way.
Perfect. Well, yeah, it's so
Yes.
easy this day with technology. Kinshipmodel.org.
Org. Yes. We're a
Okay.
nonprofit,
Oh,
got our 501c3 status, and you can also see my work there. Right now, me, Amy Inglis, and Alexis Martin co-founded that. And we're really focused on educated voters initiatives. So there's a lot of responses from candidates on that website too. So for those
oh,
interested in
that's
Osage
great.
candidates, yes, if you're interested in all, so we did one for minerals, did one for assistant chief and primary principal chief, and we also did one for Congress. So if
Oh,
you're
that's
interested
great.
in
So
those
Osage people
answers,
can, yes.
yes, can go and interact with that. All the responses are live. Some of them didn't respond, so there are a little bit of blank spots in there, but that's all right, happens. But yes, so reaching out that way too, that's a good way to get involved with a lot of the projects I do as a community because I'm a very communal person. Grassroots all the way.
Yes, and
So
you are. Thank
yes.
you for doing the good work. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you for acknowledging shit. And then it feels it feels so good to have your people, actually receive you in this
Yes.
way and, promote each other. This is a good way for us to collab and build kinship. So yes.
Yes. Well,
Oh
thank
my
you
God.
again for coming on. And I think
Yes.
that'll be it for
All
today.
righty.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you too. And thank you, the audience of Let's Have a Powwow. Keep on subscribing
Yes.
to her.
See you soon, cousins.
Later.
Wewena, Alex. If you would like to see some of Alex's art, I have included them on the Let's Have a Powwow YouTube page and on Instagram. This episode was produced, edited, and hosted by yours truly, and original music by Scales. Thanks for listening.